In this lesson, we're going to talk about some of the specialized parameters that are found on a spotlight. Alright, so for now, we're going to go ahead and start with a fresh scene with no lights that have been added in here. So let's go back to our Create panel. Let's add in some lights. We're going to use a standard spotlight. And with this spotlight, we actually have two choices. We have one that's called a target spot and one that's called a free spot. Now the difference is really only one thing, and that is that this target spot actually has some kind of an aim that's connected to it. So for example, if I take this target spot and now just choose an area, start with a light, and then you drag outward to control where this light is going to be pointing. Alright, and once you're done, just right click and you're finished. Now if I were to grab this light, pick it up, and try to move it, let's see if I can grab that, you'll notice that it stays pointed in a certain direction, and it always stays pointed at this target. So this target actually gives you a really good way to control exactly where this light is going to be pointing in your scene. Right? So you could actually take this target and actually link this to some object in your scene, maybe a character that's running around or moving, if you always need to make sure that your light is pointing directly at something. And you can see if I render how we get kind of this spotlight type of effect. So this spotlight really distributes light in exactly the same way that a real spotlight would. So it takes this point of light and then kind of projects it out in kind of this sort of a cone type shape. Alright, you can see that's exactly what we get, kind of this cone type distribution. Okay, now with a free spot, it's really the exact same thing, exact same light. The only difference is that there is no target to control exactly where this spot is pointing. So if I were to just simply drag, you can see that we really don't have any control over exactly where this spot's going to be pointing. So now I have to manually go in, drag this, rotate it, and try to get it aimed at the correct area. And this can get a little bit troublesome, especially if you're going to have any kind of a moving object, or if you need to have your light actually move and kind of pan as your scene moves around. So as a matter of personal preference, I kind of prefer to work with this target spot, just because it's a little bit easier to control, and it does have all the exact same parameters. Now as far as these parameters go, we have pretty much the same things that we looked at in the previous lesson for this omnidirectional light. We have a multiplier to control intensity, color, we have decay, near and far attenuation, but if you also look, we have this special rollout for the spotlight parameters. So if we scroll down, we have the ability to show the light cone. Now what this does is whether the object or the light is selected or deselected, it'll always show that cone, which can sometimes be useful. If that's turned on, then that cone will disappear as soon as your light is deselected. Okay, so just for demonstration's sake, just so we can keep this easy to see, I'm going to go ahead and leave that turned on. Now we also have the ability to adjust the hotspot and this fall off. Right, so this hotspot controls this centermost area of the spotlight. So what you'll see is when I render, as I start to take this hotspot beam and start to dial this down, this light should become much more focused in a very particular area. Right, you can see it's a little bit more intense around this area, but it got a little bit softer as we got to this outer area. Alright, and that's what this fall off is controlling. So what we should see is as we start to dial these very close together, we should now have this very concentrated beam of light in a very small area. Right? So we can start to dial these up together, and you'll notice that as we start to dial this hotspot beam up, it'll automatically adjust this fall-off field to always remain outside this hotspot. Alright. Alright, now we also have the ability to use something called an overshoot. Now what this will do is once this overshoot is turned on, what will happen is that objects that are even outside of this cone of light will still get illuminated. So for demonstration or for comparison, you can see this is what we had before, and now once I have this overshoot turned on, this is what we get. So now everything in my scene is lit by this cone of light. Now the benefit to this is really that you can still get even lighting over your entire scene, but we can actually have our shadows concentrated in a certain area. Alright, so just for demonstration's sake, let's go ahead and scroll up to the general parameters, turn on shadows, and we'll talk about shadows in much more detail as we get further along in this training. Now, whenever shadows are turned on, you can really start to see what this overshoot will do. Everything outside of this cone will still get lit, but only objects that are within this cone will receive shadows. So if I re-render, now you can see that there are shadows in the scene, but only in this area that falls within this actual cone. So if I turn that overshoot back off, you can get a little bit better idea of exactly what it is that is happening. So maybe if I make this cone a little bit larger, this will be a little bit easier to see. There we go. So now we have some shadows over most of our scene. And now if I turn this overshoot back on and re-render, you can see how only certain areas are receiving these shadows. Right? So this can be a quick and easy way to kind of eliminate the need to have multiple lights in your scene. And this can really start to become important whenever you're dealing with things like reflections. So if this little teacup was actually reflective, right, and it was able to actually reflect some of the things that were on this back side of the room, if we were just using the spotlight, this back side of the room would be completely dark. But by using this overshoot, you'll see that we can still get illumination on the back side of this room. So whenever we were to render this cup with a little bit of reflection, it would still be able to reflect the back side of this room. But we don't necessarily need to waste a lot of unnecessary shadow calculations on everything back here, so we just keep the shadows focused in this one area in which the camera can see. So just kind of a way of eliminating a lot of overhead and just kind of keeping your scene a little bit more streamlined. All right, so that's a look at the spotlight and some of the special parameters that are contained within that particular light.